Well, now let's take a look at what was going on the American home front. Obviously, there are, at this time, there's going to be lots of people volunteering, mostly young men, volunteering for military service, though a large number of young women volunteered as well. But a lot of young men volunteering and being drafted because, remember, in 1940, the draft was brought back. However, to contribute to the war effort, you didn't have to suit up in uniform and go overseas. People were encouraged to support the war effort by working harder, particularly in industry that had to do with producing war material. For example, you see in this poster, he can't fix guns in the air, build them right. So if you are paying close attention to your job and doing a good job of it, if you're working in a munitions factory, for example, then you are helping our boys overseas. Also, a lot of industries shifted over to producing war material. For example, the car manufacturers stopped making new cars there for a while in the early to mid 1940s, and instead were producing vehicles for the military, including a new kind of automobile, the General Purpose Vehicle. You can see in the upper left-hand corner there, General Purpose Vehicle, or GPV, or to shorten it even more, Jeep, which probably caught on pretty quickly because there was a cartoon character that appeared with the very popular Popeye the Sailor Man, this weird little animal called Eugene the Jeep, so called because that was the noise that he made.
You're a cute little fella. You must be hungry from your long trip. I got it out. You sit here, and I'll get you some grub. I'll make you a nice little bed, then I'll come back.
So you can see there that little whistling noise, which is indicated on paper, which Popeye was a comic strip before it was a cartoon, as Jeep. The FDR administration was very pro-union and pro-labor to begin with in the 1930s, but once the war started, it became even more so, and people were encouraged to participate in their local union. Free labor will win, to the extent that during the war, about 1/3 of all non-agricultural workers in the United States were unionized. FDR created a new government office, the Office of War Information, which is a euphemistic way to say, well, over in Germany, it was called the German version was the Ministry of Propaganda. Propaganda being material that is released to encourage people to be involved in the war effort, right? Or if it's released to your enemy, to discourage them. Among other things, Roosevelt, in one of his speeches, outlined 4 freedoms, and the Office of War Information then distributed that speech and images representing those 4 freedoms around the country. The 4 freedoms that Roosevelt called for were freedom of speech and freedom of worship. Those 2 were in the Bill of Rights, but he's talking about freedoms that everyone in the world should have. So speech, worship, and number 3, diverging from the Bill of Rights a little bit, freedom from want. That is to say, freedom from poverty. And number 4, freedom from fear, which would indicate a freedom from having a repressive and oppressive government, like a fascist government. Now, some conservatives were particularly a little bit shaky on that freedom number 3, freedom from want. Sounds like people getting stuff for free, sounds like socialism. So a lot of conservatives countered with the assertion that Roosevelt forgot one. He forgot the 5th freedom, free enterprise or free trade. And this was not something distributed by the government, but privately funded. There were articles and posters promoting free enterprise as well. Here are some of the posters that were commissioned by the Office of War Information, in which they commissioned the famous artist Norman Rockwell, who was famous for his paintings of small-town, all-American life. So this is one poster, but they were further subdivided. There were individual posters for each of these that were put up in post offices and other places, and also used on stamps. Ours to fight for: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want. And here you have a family having a big old turkey dinner. They're not wanting for anything as far as food goes. And freedom from fear, tucking their children away, knowing that they're safe. And of course, as in World War I and other previous wars, you could buy war bonds, alias the Victory Loan. So you bought these certificates from the U.S. government that essentially was loaning the government your money. Let's say you buy a $10 war bond. You just loaned the USA $10 to contribute toward the war effort, with the promise that when the war was over, you could cash that thing in and get back your $10 plus some interest, right? But at the moment, it was a way to help finance the war effort. The picture there in the lower left is not from the 1940s, although it's set in the 1940s. It's from the 2011 Marvel film, Captain America, the First Avenger. But I'm assuming that many of you probably have seen that, and so that little production there is a demonstration of the kind of ads and promotions that they would have during World War II to get people to be patriotic and get all energetic and want to contribute to the war effort by buying bonds. Captain America, the character, by the way, was introduced in 1940, maybe it was 41, it was around in there. It was before the war started, and was actually a character that soldiers were reading about in comic books when they were, some of the care packages that were sent to GIs included those comic books with patriotic characters like Captain America. These posters further emphasize the idea that doing a good job at the workplace, especially if the workplace had anything to do with defense, was contributing to the war effort. So speed up production, be more efficient, and turn things out faster. And as the poster in the upper left demonstrates, you can be a bomb pointed at the heart of the Axis powers. Not only do you need to work quickly and efficiently, though, you need to balance that and make sure that you work safely, because you don't want to be hurt on the job. As the poster in the middle there shows, I need you on the job full time, don't get hurt. So if you are careless, if you are reckless, that's unpatriotic, because you might hurt yourself, and that's going to hurt the war effort. Up in the upper left, you have this horribly stereotypical image of a Japanese soldier saying, go ahead, take the day off. So don't be a slacker. Make sure that you're working hard and not, not playing hooky, not, just kind of goofing around, because that's unpatriotic. Because, as General Eisenhower is telling us there on the right, your work is vital to victory. Our ships, our planes, our tanks must have oil. So if you work in the oil fields, don't be wishing that you could join the military and go off and be a sailor or a soldier, because we also need strong young men working in the oil fields, because if we don't have oil, then the war effort is going to be hampered. So do your part. Everyone has a part to play. And for the first time, Americans on a large scale were being encouraged by the government to recycle. There were, well, today we have recycling bins. They would have paper drives in which everyone was encouraged to donate all their scrap paper, scrap metal drives, rubber, old tires, anything that could be converted into something that could be useful in the war effort. As the poster on the upper right says, waste helps the enemy. So conserve material. Are you doing all you can? And you weren't only asked to recycle, you were also being asked to ration what you used. In fact, the government helped you out by rationing some things for you. And this was true in Britain as well. So it reached a point pretty quickly where each family was given some stamps or certificates that they were able to trade in for basic goods like butter or sugar or gasoline. And once you used them up, that was your ration for that month. They had to have extra. They had to have extra of those food items in particular to feed the troops. And there were a huge number of troops. So be patriotic. Rationing gives you your fair share, as the poster in the lower right says. You're getting your fair share, but don't hoard. Do with less so they'll have enough, they being the soldiers there. So this general feeling that the government was fostering was that this was a huge group effort and everybody's involved, not just the soldiers and the sailors and the airmen and the Marines and so forth, but even the civilians. We can all do our part even if we aren't directly fighting, by supporting the war effort with buying bonds, by conserving, by rationing the things that we use and recycling, by being more conscientious at the workplace, especially if we're in one of the defense industries. If you were in the active military, you were expected to do your part for the war effort and be patriotic and do your military job by protecting government property, which means don't get the VD, venereal disease, sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea. Because if you do, you're going to be out of commission for a while, and that's going to lower the manpower, and that's ultimately going to help the Axis, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to succumb to, as the poster on the upper left says, a booby trap and wind up with one of these diseases. No, you want to do what the poster at the lower center says: fool the Axis and use prophylaxis. It prevents venereal disease. In other words, condoms, which were issued to GIs in the field for their protection. Sometimes soldiers used those when they were in combat to fit over the end of their rifle so that water didn't get in the barrel if they were crossing a river or something. But I have it on good authority that sometimes they used them for other things. In fact, Warner Brothers, which produced the Looney Tunes cartoons starring Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and etc., volunteered to produce several training films for military servicemen that were shown, not shown in theaters. These were not meant for kids. They had bad language and sexual situations, and they starred a new character, Private Snafu. Snafu being an acronym that had been in use since World War I. A soldier's expression, snafu, situation normal, all effed up. There was another expression, foobar, effed up beyond all recognition. So snafu is a huge mistake, in other words. And these training videos, about 5 minutes long, you can find, I think, all of them on YouTube. At the bottom here, there's scenes from one that was called Booby Traps, in which Private Snafu and the on the left there He's gotten all liquored up, and he's making out with some European girl, and winds up saying too much about military business, and turns out she's a spy. On the right, even worse than that, you have this. Well, it's a dummy made up to look like an attractive girl that makes the soldier come close, but it's a booby trap and it blows up. Which is not to say that French girls will blow up. It's kind of saying, and they do come out and say it, that the real booby trap there is that you might get an STD, and that's going to put you out of commission and impact your military service, which would be unpatriotic. That idea of loose talk being dangerous, giving out too much information, was not only intended for soldiers dealing with ladies in strange lands, but people back home who might be receiving letters from their loved ones who are away at war that may have details. Now, a lot of these letters were censored, and any sensitive details were cut out by the censors. But still, if you've got a letter from, Cousin Joe or Uncle Dave or whatever, and you talk about it too much, then it might reach the wrong ears, and the enemy might be able to figure out, where that unit is stationed and what they're up to. There was a famous World War I poster that got reintroduced. The ears have walls, and there was another one from World War I, loose lips sink ships. And that idea is presented not only in those classic posters that were brought back, but these new ones as well. Also reminiscent of World War I propaganda posters, in the idea of othering the enemy. Some of these posters are reminiscent of for example, the World War I posters of portraying German soldiers as the savage Hun, uncivilized and barbaric. Here on the upper left-hand corner, you've got the jack-booted heel of Nazism. It's gonna stomp on your church. Or, even worse, this very stereotypical representation of a Japanese soldier is gonna come and ravish your wives and daughters and grab up your babies, probably gonna eat them. The thing is that, unlike World War I, there were enough stories coming out from what was happening in concentration camps and what had happened at Nanking to make these seem a whole lot more believable to a lot of Americans at the time. The most famous poster from this era, though, and the most famous image is of Rosie the Riveter in the poster where she is bearing her muscle and saying, "We can do it," which is also kind of hearkening back to World War I, when so many women entered into factory work to replace the many men who were away at military service. This is saying that, yes, we can do a man's job, which, is going to come back and haunt the men who would like to keep the women in the kitchen because they prove they can do a man's job. So what's going to happen when all the men come back and tell the women to go back home? Here are some other posters encouraging the same kind of attitude, that not as famous as Rosie the Riveter, but effective nonetheless. On the lower right-hand corner, the girl he left behind is still behind him. She's a WOW, W-O-W, Women's Ordnance Worker. Ordnance meaning ammunition. And there to the left, the lower left, you can see a photograph of a WOW at work inspecting ordnance. As the upper left one says, "Longing won't bring him back sooner. Get a war job." Upper right, find a job where you fit best in industry, agriculture, or business. Whatever it is, it's supporting the war effort. And again, this is important to remember. This is a very big part of the FDR New Deal philosophy and approach. Everybody's working together. We're all in this together.